Elliot Carter had planned everything in his head 100 times before he ever stepped out of the car 3 miles from the Whitmore estate, but nothing prepared him for how it would actually feel to stand in the rain wearing another man's life. He'd bought the coat from a thrift shop in the city, rubbed dirt into the knees of his trousers himself, and practiced the slow, tired way a man walks when he hasn't slept indoors in days. It felt almost like a game until the first security guard looked through him like he was furniture, and then it stopped feeling like a game at all. He was supposed to marry Brianna Whitmore in 48 hours. Their families had shaken hands on it years earlier, over dinners neither of them chose, in rooms full of people discussing merger terms disguised as wedding plans. He had never once asked her a question that mattered, not really, and she had never asked him one either. So somewhere between the airport and the estate gates, he'd made a decision that felt reckless even to him. He would arrive not as Elliot Carter, heir to a fortune, but as a stranger with nothing, and he would watch. Just watch. He told himself it was fair, that a woman about to spend her life with him deserved to be seen clearly, and that he deserved the same. What he didn't expect was how quickly the mansion would answer his question. The rain came down harder as he stood near the side gate, soaked through within minutes, and person after person walked past him without a second glance, too busy carrying flowers and wine crates for a party that hadn't even started yet. He wasn't hurt by that. He'd expected indifference from strangers. What he wasn't ready for was the voice on the terrace, sharp and clipped, telling someone to get him out of sight before the guests arrived, because people like him always had a story, and if you fed one, 10 more would show up tomorrow. He knew that voice. He'd heard it laugh at dinner parties, seen it charm his own mother over champagne. Standing there in the mud, hearing it aimed at him like he was a stain on the property, something in his chest went quiet and cold in a way he hadn't felt in years. He didn't say anything. He just lowered his head the way a man who'd been turned away 100 times might, and let the rain run down the back of his neck, and told himself this was exactly why he'd come, better to know now, dressed as no one, than to find out after the rings were on. Still, walking away from that gate, boots heavy with mud, he felt the weight of it settle differently than he'd imagined it would from the comfort of his old life. This wasn't a business risk he could hedge against or a bad quarter he could explain away in a shareholder call. This was a woman who would one day stand beside him for cameras and call him her husband, and she had just looked at a hungry stranger and seen only inconvenience. He hadn't even reached the end of the driveway before he understood that this test, the one he'd built so carefully in his head as a kind of formality, had already started giving him an answer he wasn't sure he wanted. Maddie Brooks hadn't planned on stopping when she saw him near the gate. She had a dozen things to finish before the pre-wedding dinner, trays to set, linens to press, a guest list to double-check with the caterers, but something about the way he stood there, soaked and small against the size of the house, made her feet change direction before her mind had fully decided anything. She grabbed an umbrella from the mudroom without really thinking about it, ladled soup into a bowl because it was the first thing on the stove, and walked out into weather she had no reason to walk into. She didn't ask him what happened or where he'd come from. She'd learned a long time ago that people who are struggling don't usually want an interview, they just want to be treated like they still belong to the human race, so she talked to him the way she'd talk to anyone, asked if he'd traveled far, told him the bread was still warm, made room for him under the umbrella like it cost her nothing at all. When Brianna's voice cut through the garden from the terrace, telling Maddie to hurry him along before the guests saw, Maddie didn't argue, but she didn't rush either. She finished what she was doing with the same quiet care she'd started with, and when she finally turned back to him, there was no apology in her voice for what her employer had said, only a kind of steady gentleness, as if she'd decided a long time ago that other people's cruelty wasn't going to change how she treated a stranger in the rain. That night, when the storm refused to let up, it was Eleanor Carter, resting in the estate while she recovered from a hip injury, who insisted the traveler be given the garden cottage instead of being sent back into the weather, and it was Maddie who walked him there, lit the small heater, and apologized for a room that needed no apology, because it was warm and dry and more than most people would have offered. She didn't know she was standing in front of the man who was 2 days from marrying her employer's daughter. She only knew there was a stranger who was cold, and she had the ability to make him less cold, and to her those two facts were enough to act on without needing anything else. Over the next day, Elliot watched her move through the estate and noticed something he hadn't expected to find, that her kindness wasn't a performance for an audience, because there was no audience most of the time, just an old cook she helped carry vegetables for, a gardener she chatted with, a stranger in a cottage nobody important would ever think to check on. She brought him breakfast the next morning without being asked, admitted she did it because she remembered what it felt like when her own family had nothing and strangers still showed up anyway, and told him, almost as an afterthought, that kindness only counts when nobody's making you give it. He sat with that sentence longer than he expected to, turning it over the way you turn over something you didn't know you needed to hear, because in his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, he could not remember the last time anyone had given him anything without already calculating what they'd get back. By the time the pre-wedding dinner arrived, Elliot had already seen enough of Brianna to know the shape of what he was walking into, but some small, stubborn part of him had still hoped he was wrong. That hope didn't survive the evening on the cottage steps, when her voice drifted down from the terrace, bright with laughter, telling her friends she couldn't wait for the wedding to be over so her real life could finally start, the one where the Carter name opened doors she'd been trying to force open for years. She said it lightly, the way people say things they've never had to think twice about, and her friend laughed back that she was marrying a billionaire, as if that settled every question worth asking about a marriage. Brianna agreed without hesitation, said the years of video calls and family arrangements would finally be worth it, and Elliot sat in the dark below the terrace and felt something in him go very still. He wasn't angry, not exactly. It was closer to grief, the specific, quiet grief of confirming something you already suspected but had been holding at arm's length, hoping it wouldn't turn out to be true. He thought about every dinner they'd had together, every photo taken for his mother's approval, every conversation that had felt like two people reading from scripts they didn't write, and understood now why it had always felt that way. Maddie noticed something had shifted in him that night, though she had no way of knowing why, and when she told him to get some rest because tomorrow would be another long day, he almost laughed at how true that sentence was about to become, just not in the way she meant it. The next evening, the estate transformed into the kind of event his family had been staging for generations, chandeliers blazing, a string quartet playing something elegant and forgettable, waiters gliding between investors and relatives who'd come to get a look at the woman who'd landed Elliot Carter. Upstairs, Brianna checked her reflection in a designer gown and told her friends everything had to be perfect, because after tonight her whole life was about to change, and she wasn't wrong about that, just not for the reasons she thought. Downstairs, Elliot kept the torn coat on, kept the fake beard in place, and held a plain white envelope with his own name written across the front in his own handwriting. He wasn't nervous the way he'd expected to be. He felt strangely calm, the way you feel once a decision has already been made somewhere underneath the part of you that was still pretending to deliberate. He walked toward the front entrance as the first guests arrived, aware that within minutes every person in that house was going to learn exactly who had been standing in their reign for 2 days, and exactly what he had learned about the woman he was supposed to marry, and about the one who never knew she was being watched at all. If Elliot's test hit you right in the chest, you already know what real kindness looks like, and what it doesn't. Tell me in the comments, would you have recognized Maddie's heart before the money ever got involved? If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Share this with someone who still believes kindness is worth more than a fortune.